Welcome to Women's Advocate's first ever virtual fundraising event. We're so glad you joined us today. My name's Estelle Brower, and I'm Executive Director of Women's Advocates. It's my job to kick this thing off today. The main thing I want to do is say thank you. I have a whole bunch of people to thank. First, I want to start with our sponsors. If you came forward as a sponsor for this event, thank you so much for believing that we could pull this off. We did it. If you are one of our partners in the community, thank you so much for working with us, for supporting all the same people that we support. We could never do what we do without you. If you were involved in putting this program together today, whether you're in front of the camera, behind the camera, or involved in some other way, thank you so much. Of course, we couldn't have done it without you. We thank you for your generosity and your vulnerability in doing this. If you're on our board of directors, thank you for always having our backs. We appreciate it more than I can say. And if you are a member of our staff, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am so proud of you. I'm so proud of everything that you have done all the time, but especially during these really challenging times of the pandemic. You have brought so much heart and so much soul to the table. Thank you. This pandemic has been hard. It's been hard for everybody. That's a huge understatement. It's been especially hard for people who are in abusive relationships, and that's who we're here to serve. We've stepped up though. We've stepped up and we've dug deep, and we are continuing to do our work across the whole spectrum of outreach, education, prevention work that we do in the community, providing safety resources, the shelter that we provide for people who have been victimized and who are at risk of being victimized again, and the housing and advocacy work that we do for victim survivors after they leave our shelter to make sure that they are stable in the community and they're safely housed. There's so much more to say. There are many, many more voices that I want you to hear from today, so we are going to move right along to those other voices. But first, to all of you, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for caring. Now on to some other voices.
Everything when you take a holistic approach, everything is connected, right? As a human being, like your kids can't go to school and focus on their education if they're hungry, right? Or if they're couch hopping and moving from place to place. When you can't get a job, it's hard for you to focus on getting a job if you don't know where you're going to live at from day to day. If you have a job, but it doesn't pay you adequate, wages, it's hard to really focus on getting a healthy food, If you live in an area that is, quote, the term that used to be used was food deserts, but you live in an area where you don't have transportation, you work, but yet you don't have a place that, has access to fresh produce or fresh food, so you're eating overly processed food and junk food all the time, which leads to chronic disease and illness. That in itself is another issue. Yeah. And a lot of those lead to stresses on homes where you would find maybe a mother who is in a situation where she's dealing with domestic violence because she doesn't feel like she has any adequate resources or a way to kind of uplift herself and her children to remove herself from the situation. She stays in that home and she stays up under the eyes, the guise of that abuser. It's already hard enough for a lot of women to leave their abusers, whether it be for financial situations or just fear for the safety of them or their children. But when you get over those things and you say, if I leave this person, what do I have anyway? What resources do I have anyway? What access to shelter do I have anyway? You can draw a line to why some of our families or women feel stuck in their current situations, and sometimes don't look for help to escape those situations. But because of COVID and a lot of jobs kind of being, people being furloughed or whatnot, where on a normal basis, where somebody living in a domestic violence situation may be able to go to work and their children go to school, and those few 8 to 10 hours a day are a sort of reprieve from the violence at home, or maybe their abuser has to go to work, and that 8 to 10 hours that they're at work are a reprieve from the violence at home. Now that's gone.
Yeah.
So now you're stuck at home with that individual and in that toxic situation all day long. And we're seeing a lot of people really kind of hit their boiling point for whatever reason that is, good, bad, or indifferent. And the domestic violence numbers are creeping up.
We get a lot of our calls over the lunch hour. And so it's a lot of those are women who are essential workers and calling on their lunch breaks.
That's because it's the only time they can get away from work and the abusive partner. A lot of people have told Becker they aren't planning to leave right now. They're afraid of the virus, so they don't want to stay with a friend, or they can't get away from their abuser long enough to plan their escape. So Becker's been changing the advice she gives people. Instead of helping them make plans to snag their important papers and have a place to go, she's making sure they have a way to stay safe from the violence in their homes.
If physical violence is going to happen, make sure that you are as small as possible. Make sure that you're away from areas that have weapons or knives or anything like that.
Dealing with abuse, especially while on lockdown with the abuser, is incredibly stressful.
All right, well, I can stay, experience the abuse, live through what I have been living through, and it sucks. Or I can leave, but shelters are really full during the pandemic. I don't have childcare outside of my abuser. My kids aren't in school, and I'll have to do distance learning, and I don't know where I'm going to go, so I might not have an internet connection for the children to do distance learning. Therapy is telehealth now, and if I don't have an internet connection, I can't do that. I don't know where I'm going to go. So the pandemic has really taken a lot of choice away, a lot of agency away from survivors.
Even with health access, there's so many things that have changed. You have COVID-19 testing sites. You have it where families are struggling because they have to go for appointments and they don't want you to bring your children. So then that impacts how we're going to provide that service.
You're standing at the edge of a path in a forest, and there are like a billion different paths that are available to you to take. And it's up to you which one to take. But pandemic-wise, a lot of those paths have closed. And so the choice, I think when we think about the main choice that a survivor has, we think about to leave or to stay in an abusive relationship. And that choice is up to the survivor. But right now, it's not really. The choices have been really limited by our current circumstances. So whereas it used to be, okay, survivor, you can stay with this person for as long as you want, and you can continue experiencing abuse and try and get a little bit of joy on the side if you can. Or, okay, here you can leave your abuser, and here are a bunch of different options for shelters, for legal protections, for getting yourself financially stable enough to leave. And right now, a lot of those options on the leaving side of things have closed up. And there are fewer choices to be made.
The way we see it is that if 1 in 3 women will be a victim of domestic abuse by age 40, we probably don't have to look far to find people who are in need of safety resources. So that's why we connect with people. Since July, we've educated over 1,000 people a month on topics such as navigating crisis with a trauma survivor, reproductive coercion, supporting children through trauma. Our live chat began, and since then we've connected with over 200 people with their data on their phone or through a computer when they couldn't use the telephone to talk to a crisis resource advocate. And we find that the more that we connect with others in the community, the more we're bringing our safety resources closer to who need it.
One strong role is programming and awareness. Understanding those cultural backgrounds and understanding sometimes the hesitation in what that looks like for a person who want help, but not necessarily the criminal justice help. It's understanding what does help mean to that person. And it doesn't always have to be from a punitive approach, right? So with that, within that particular area is for women advocates to understand, to better understand what is it that from those who are victims of domestic violence, what does justice look like for them? And having that to be the central focus on how we move forward to better address domestic violence, where we can understand the role of the criminal justice system, but also understand what justice looks like for those who are victims of domestic violence.
We just need more of the community to see what impact we are on the community, because right now in this pandemic, we have more domestic violence is at a higher rate.
You do advocacy, you're kind of learning together with other people. I think advocacy is a learning process. And it's even for me, it's a learning process. You have to say, I may not know all the answers. I'm a little vulnerable here and here. But if you can help me and I can support you genuinely to ensure that you're safe and that the goals that you request as a person who's a domestic violence person, and respect what choices you want to make. But I think it's more about support. And it's like, okay, so what do you want? And let that person make choices.
But the concept of calling 4 or 5 different social service agencies every day trying to find shelter and hearing no, or hearing we can't help you, or hearing our services are full right now, has to be exhausting. And I'm sure it feels humiliating for a lot of these people because you never want to be in a position to be making this call.
Some are very involved, and some neighbors are very just looking out for their other neighbors, and they recognize maybe there is a vulnerable person in the building, and some neighbors really take people under their wing. Unfortunately, there is a lot of just, I don't want to be involved, I don't want to be a snitch. We had a issue about 4 months ago where he was beating her up really bad, and the police were just not responding in any amount of time that was effective. So when it was occurring, and even when the management knew about it, when other residents are calling saying he's here, he's beating her up, or he's doing this, and we would call the police. And St. Paul actually does a pretty decent job, but even a half hour, it's over, it's done.
I hear everything from victim survivors who do say, like, I don't want to call the cops. I never want to call the cops. I don't want to leave. I just want to be safe. I want my kids to be safe in our home. I want our home to be a safe place for our family again. If you wanted to be the man of the house, I think we have to change our understanding of the man in the house as someone who controls and keeps people in line to someone who keeps himself in line.
But there's moments of wellness that appear here and there, and those are the fun times. We all jumped for joy the other day when one of the moms who's staying with us with 5 kids found housing. There was a flurry of phone calls that went back and forth about how exciting it was that someone finds housing. We were all happy, we're still happy, but it seems weird when you're happy that someone was allowed to be housed. But that's where we are, and that's where we work pretty much every day together. And we hold each other up, even though sometimes it's behind a Zoom screen.
Being able to know that women's advocates has a program, such as the aftercare and housing program to help individuals come out of homelessness and just get away from their abusers, get away from that cycle, is also important. So,
how much domestic abuse do you see among the people that you work with at PPR?
I would say we see about 25% of the time we see it. And domestic violence can go either way. It's not just something that's specific to women. Even though a lot of the help is provided to women, there are men, and we have had participants in our program who are males who have experienced domestic violence.
So I'm just so struck. We are a domestic violence organization, but there are so many organizations out there that are really their missions are housing focused, and domestic violence pops up all over the place. We're not the only people in the community who are serving domestic violence victims, but lots of organizations that are focused on housing, homelessness, are also seeing it.
Yes, it's something that it's a never-ending cycle for some. There are others who are able to break that cycle and who are able to move forward. But I feel that as long as we have organizations like Women's Advocates who can provide that information and who can provide the help needed, at some point we're going to be able to come ahead of it. I don't feel that domestic violence is something we're ever going to end. It's an ongoing issue. And unfortunately, a lot of the times, because the kids are present and they see it, then there is always that potential for having that child either become a victim or become an abuser.
That cycle of domestic abuse.
Yes.
That we're all in business to try to break that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Rita, we're so glad you're on our board.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Like I said, the timing of the pandemic and everything was completely out of her hands, but I am really grateful. I do feel, and I strongly believe, that donations are going to help women's advocates, and that is also going to help the shelter, the workers, be able to help the participants that we help and be able to get them out of homelessness. And that's the most important thing.
Domestic violence by its nature occurs in the home. And so when we try to break away from domestic violence, you end up breaking away from your home and the closest thing you had to stability and safety for yourself and your children.
Domestic violence is unfortunately a big issue in affordable housing. People are coming out of domestic situations, they end up getting bad rental references because, prior significant others, were causing all kinds of property damage and disturbance, police calls. So what happens is, people get into these situations and they get these really bad negative rental references, and then they can't move forward into other properties.
We know that domestic violence impacts all facets of people's lives, and so our model reflects that and aims to address domestic violence where we live, learn, work, and gather. How we do this involves connecting with landlords who are concerned about their tenant safety and want to promote healthier living spaces where the community cares and is there to support them.
Housing's important, and squeezing the bubble and just evicting people doesn't help the community at large either, because that's what essentially you're doing is if you're just automatically evicting people as soon as there's a problem and not at least trying initially to get that person resources or say, hey, what can we do to help? Or
hopefully doors are opening in places that they were previously closed because people are taking time to learn about their own biases and to think about how they have made assumptions about Black women, and hopefully that opens doors for them without them having to constantly advocate for themselves and to declare that they are a human with dignity. I think and I hope that this helps landlords and property managers recognize ways that they have made assumptions about people and created different policies that really were damaging for people of color. When we know that our criminal justice system is biased towards people of color, and yet we use criminal background checks to determine if someone can be in housing, that's going to be an exacerbation of an already racist system. So.
And impressively, by the end of a year of housing stability in our aftercare program, we've seen women start entire new careers. We've seen women enroll in college. We've seen women start nursing certification programs and find new careers that work for them. And when a survivor isn't as vulnerable, if she's not as vulnerable financially or housing-wise, or if she isn't vulnerable because of an incredible dependency on others for things like housing or transportation or childcare, when she's not that vulnerable, she's further away from the control of her abuser. And we absolutely see that housing stability is one of the most critical things that we need to work on with the community. We need to work on it so those who leave our shelter get a chance to take care of their lives on their own terms.
I always tell people, you are not what has happened to you. Things have happened to us, but we do not have to accept that, and we don't have to repeat that, but we can get help with that, like helping to discharge those things again from our bodies. And that's what people are dealing with, who come in, who ask for help, who have been hurt, who have been wounded, who have been through domestic violence, who have been through being mentally abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, even in past history from childhood. So a lot of the things that I talk about has a lot to do with our childhood experiences, and sometimes taking on those same personas when we become adults, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what lives in our body. And so with that, I would say that sometimes some of the things that we're dealing with are picked up through our early childhood. Sometimes not. That doesn't mean that it's for everyone. Sometimes during adolescence, sometimes in adulthood. But whatever it is, our bodies don't like it. Just like if we're eating food we don't like, our bodies will react differently. So if something comes in our body that is foreign to our bodies, like trauma, our bodies won't like it. It will react in a different way and want to expel it, want to get it out. But some people who have dealt with historical trauma, it lives in their body for long periods of time. And sometimes when people are born into that, they don't have an escapism. They don't even know that they can escape that pain and that fear, and that they think it's normal. They've actually normalized these traumatic experiences. And those things live in generations, believe it or not. And they're transmittable generation to generation to generation. And so to recap some of that, I will just say that when we're working with individuals who either have experienced trauma, is currently experiencing trauma, they take that in. They go to a safe space, which is what brought us all here. Like people searching for a safe space metaphysically and physically. And then you have those folks working with individuals who are here as helpers, who are here to help relieve some of that stress by just being a safe, brave person to come to. And then they are going to receive through words those pains, those wounds, like what is happening with those individuals they're helping. And then they're going to internalize those things to a certain extent. We don't want it to go too far, but to a certain extent, to understand the empathy and then helped project back the resiliency to individuals to keep going, to keep getting through that. And so that the individual advocates don't take this on and become that as well. that's where the reflective work that I come in and do helps them to have a safe space to express that. So again, holding the advocates while they hold the family and the children that they serve, so that everyone starts to move towards their healthiest self, whatever that means for individuals.
Trauma responses are normal responses to abnormal circumstances. So what looks very strange from the landlord-tenant perspective can actually, when you look at the trauma lens, starts to make more sense and starts to give landlords a way to talk more with the people that they're coming in contact with, to give space for those to really get to the heart of what their relationship even is. I'm just here to collect the rent. But I want to understand all those other pieces around the rest of your life so that I don't re-traumatize and so that I don't damage our relationship further. The more I've worked in this field, the more it's helped me self-assess my own behaviors when I work with clients. And what that means is thinking about, am I doing this so that I have control over this person? Am I doing it so that it's easier for me? Am I doing it because it's how I want their life to be, how I think their life can be? Or am I doing something that's truly supportive of what she has asked me to do? We say, and we need to believe, that women are the experts on their own lives. And I can imagine a path for her stability and her security, but I have to be so supportive when she names something that might be different than mine.
Safety follows that immediately. When you start letting people make their own choices and start giving people the tools they need to make those choices fully informed, safety comes naturally.
I personally feel that we all desire some type of companionship, friendship. We all have needs. I don't think that people should be isolated or alone. I think that we just need to work on how to maintain healthy relationships moving forward. Whether that's friendships or actual partnerships, relationships. So I think that's the issue, not necessarily having someone live with them or being in another toxic relationship or a relationship that's not good for them, but just learning what a healthy relationship looks like and how they can move forward with it. And not make them feel ashamed for being with someone. Or
I get to interact with people who have been touched by the work of women's advocates. And while we are striving to continue to increase awareness about our services and about our existence, there are hundreds of people who have come through our doors and who have been able to be heard, to be validated, to be trusted by all of the different advocates at our organization that does have this 45-year legacy.
You're showing them that there's someone who cares about them and that they're in a safe place. And it also gives them a more home setting. I want them to feel that they could trust me, that, you know, that there is someone that wants to hear them and not judge them.
There's obviously a new resident at the shelter when we're there volunteering. And, you know, kind of a scared look in her eye, maybe real effects of her abuse, maybe bruises, maybe whatever. And how nervous and unsure she is, and she doesn't want to join in with the activities and all that, and she kind of sits back and watches. And then I get there a month later and she's so much better, you know, and her eyes are brighter and she's joining in and she's talking to us and, you know, being a part of it. And then maybe even a month later, when she's solidly on her feet and looking forward to getting back out into the community and getting on her own. And, you know, so the transformation from arrival to departure is bittersweet. Bitter becomes sweet, I guess.
Hi, My name is Athena, and my job is to ask you to break out your wallets and support women's advocates. And I'm going to get to that. But first, I want to take a moment and reflect on what we've seen. You know the statistics. You know that there were animal shelters before there were shelters for women and children fleeing their abusers. And you know that violence, like a virus, has no regard for how much money you have, how educated you are, where you live, or the color of your skin. Sadly, violence is something we all have in common. What we don't have in common are the money, relationships, and safe places that women and families need to put themselves back together. It broke my heart to hear that we're helping women keep themselves safer when the violence begins. Make yourself as small as possible. Make sure that you're not around sharp objects or firearms. We can do better. I support women's advocates because I support survivors and people who deserve better. And since my service on the board at Casa de Esperanza, I have seen for myself how important community outreach is, crisis intervention, emergency shelter, and housing advocacy is in supporting women and families who are trying to recover from abuse. After seeing these videos with you, I am in awe of the network of people who every day are working to make sure that women and their families have a place to go. You know, I think it's safe to say that this year has been hard. It's an understatement, I know. And as polarized as we are in this country right now, we are also experiencing shared trauma through the global pandemic that keeps kids at home, that has put millions of us out of work, and that has asked those of us who still have our health and wealth to give more to more places and to more people. Like you, our family has given to more people and places than we ever have, and I balance the checkbook in my house, so I know what the bottom line is, and every time I look at it, I think, we can't give anymore. But then we do, because we're asked, and because we can. Because I know that our contribution combined with your contribution really does make a difference. It means more outreach, it means more beds, it means more. And right now, when so many of us have so much less, more is better. More is necessary. Since April, Women's Advocates has been finding new and creative ways to nourish and support our families. They've been doing the work every day, and today is our opportunity to show them some love. Let them know we see them. We see the work, we see the need, and we care. We care about women who are afraid to leave and instead try to make themselves as small as possible when the violence begins. We care about families that had few options before the pandemic and even less now. We care, and together we're going to use our checkbooks to weave a blanket of support so they can choose. So if they decide to leave, there is somewhere to go. That is powerful. You and I together, along with everyone else watching, can send a loud message. We will stand together against violence. Who do we choose to be? Generous, open-hearted, and loving. So back to that wallet opening part, that blanket of support I mentioned, it has a price tag. In order to support what Women's Advocates is doing, we need to raise $75,000 today because we are doing more than we have ever done before, and we're living through more than we thought we could before. So, between you and me, I know you've been asked for a lot this year. I know, and I thank you for all that you have given. And I know that I have no right to ask you to give more. But I am, because I know that like me, you answer the call. You believe in survivors, and you believe in the work that Women's Advocates does. Like me, you know that without the work of Women's Advocates, our women and families would have less choice, less options. What can you contribute today? What would that number be? Put it in your head. What if you doubled that number? What would that look like? How does that feel? Could you make that work? Will you? And while you're thinking about it, think about this. The Otto Bremer Trust is going to match it. So if you were thinking about giving $500 and then you doubled it to $1,000, the Otto Bremer Trust is going to match that for a total gift of $2,000. That's a 300% increase. How do you like my math? But seriously, your gift sends a message that is more than money. It says, I see you, I care about you, and I want to help. Even though you can't see him, there are hundreds of us on this call today. Together, we can do something really big. We can show our love and support for all of the staff at Women's Advocates and the women and family they serve. Together, let's send a message. We see you, and we love you.